what I'm going to talk about has some similarities to what Lotta was talking about and a lot of connections. I've looked at how teachers reflect on social relations in distance education. The background of the study is that this is upper secondary school, and in the Swedish-speaking regions of Finland, which are marked with yellow here on the map, and you can see actually, here's Umeå, and there's Vasa, so there's not very far distance in between there. Because of we're maybe 350,000 Swedish-speaking people in Finland, and the upper secondary schools are scattered in regions, and there aren't money to employ teachers to teach in all the different subjects. For instance, languages that are not common, or. So they have found a solution to combine distance education with face-to-face students. So the teacher gets, through Adobe Connect, for instance, and Frontal, they get students at a distance while having their face-to-face class at the same time. This is what concerns me, because how can we provide high-quality teaching and learning when we mix face-to-face students and distance students, especially with regards to maintaining authentic interaction? And I find this problematic in many ways. So if you look at face-to-face teaching, I think of the campfire, like the traditional historical, where we used to sit and talk about Bildung. That is Bildung, isn't it? I mean, learning from the storytelling, where you can identify with the person, you can collaborate, you can be part of the story, you can see the non-verbal, the verbal, everything. It's an authentic interaction, which also neurologically they've seen it has a lot to do with empathy development. So it's very important for being a human, if you talk at it as a building aspect of it. And when you look at what researchers say about risks and benefits of screen behavior and stuff like that, this is sociologist Twenge. She says the more screen time we use, the more risk there are for loneliness, depression, communication problems, suicides go up, all of this. While some others say, well, we become smarter, more informed, more creative, blah, blah, blah. But these are social and relational problems, and how can we know that it won't be a problem? We don't really know the impact of technology. But we know that it creates social and relational problems. And how can this young generation then in the future learn how to communicate face-to-face in a proper manner if we just put them behind screens? Prior research that I've done around distance learning I've found a lot of the same problems, how to create meaningful and active learning, how to create authentic interaction. How do we do interactivity in new ways? And how do we, as I say, create a new learning culture that responds to the learner's needs behind the screen, or the teacher's need? And how do we create a geographical equality and effective use of researches? There are big questions regarding this kind of design of learning and education in order to save money, in a sense. And when you talk about usability for learning, it's mostly about the technical. The technical stuff should work and all of that. That's what the traditional way of talking about usability when it comes to technology. But there are so many more different layers to and dimensions that has to do with the usability when you use it in a pedagogical setting. To break these down, I'd say usability is all about designing for the agency for the student and the agency for the teacher. And these three down here is based on a figure by Peters, and when that's the technical side to it, included with the multimedia content. But that's the box of the technical. Then on top of that, we have how does this system create agency for pedagogical issues, or give the students or the teachers the social agency to collaborate, for instance, And this was a good example that Lotta gave, that, they didn't have the agency to do it, so there was no usability in that sense. And another layer on that is the collegial collaborative agency, which I was talking with Fanny about yesterday, that there is so much more on different levels that we need to in order for this to succeed. And this has been the discussion all through these days, I believe. But it's about empowerment and creating so they have agency in all of these levels. And what you were talking about earlier here about the learning, that's also what I call the meta-reflective agency, because you have to be able to talk about your learning, and this is something that it's also a dimension that we need to add to these kind of discussions when it comes to technology use. So I looked at this, what does research say about relational competence? What is it exactly if you break it down? And Aspelin, he lists the social interaction, emotional communication, dialogue, personal development, which you talked about, and personal connection. And Rim and Kaufman, they identified these two as keys to relational competence. The sensitivity the teacher has to identify needs of the students, and the responsivity to acknowledge and do something about it. So these are keys to relational competence. And how do we transfer these then to a digital environment? What is digital relational competence? Well, how can we design for it, and how can we discuss it in a teacher setting? So the research question that I had in here is, which needs and challenges are teachers that teaching both face-to-face and distance student experiencing, and how do the teachers consider relational aspects in distance learning situations? I call this design-based research because it focuses on the design that they have. It's also process-oriented. I look at teacher as an iterative process designer of their own didactical design. And it's targeting their agency and their reactivity to their design. So in that sense, somebody said the word coaching here, and I think that's exactly what it is. As a researcher, you become sort of a coach to ask the critical questions that sort of develops their thinking about their own design. And I've experienced that these interviews go on forever because they don't really want to stop, and after this has been a really good discussion. Sort of like a relief that, wow, I needed to discuss this, because there's been a lot of questions, but maybe not even, that they're formulated in their head. They're just there. And the interviews have been semi-structured and pre-survey stimulating. So I have sent out a survey in advance where they can look at all these different factors, which I'll show you here. And this is based on different theories around like self-determination theory, self-regulated learning theory, motivational theories, and so forth. So they answered these questions rated from 1 to 7, and the distance teaching worked well for visualizing the learning process. And then they filled out, describe why you think like that, and give examples how you did it. And they could write as much as they wanted to. And this was before the interview. So they had been thinking about these issues beforehand, and then we could discuss it in relation to their didactical design. The preliminary results, themes that I find important is inequality, which is very obvious in many sense. Anonymity, the students are invisible. And vulnerability, because it creates vulnerability in the students when they don't really connect to the other person, that the relational factor is not what it should be, so it makes them insecure and vulnerable. For instance, one teacher said, sometimes I place the face-to-face students around a table so everyone could be seen by the distance students then, but well, they weren't comfortable. So the teacher tried to do different things to create this relational connection and all of that, but it didn't work. They didn't have words really to talk about it, and the teacher didn't feel that he had the right to demand different things. All the ethical issues come into play, and about the invisibility. A big problem is that some distance students didn't have proper equipment, no camera, and the worst case is no microphone. And then I cannot see if they understand what I'm saying. In class you can see if someone doesn't understand. This didn't work the same way. So they lose the tool for sensitivity to their students' needs, and they couldn't see, does this one need help, or so it's sort of, you can't have this relational, it's lost. It's just more like one said, a rigid lecture that you can't change. You can't be spontaneous. You can't put into it which comes naturally to explain things. And this is lost, and they don't have the knowledge to compensate for it. I had given discussion topics beforehand. I reminded them that the day before so they could prepare questions. It worked very, very badly. Worse than in class, perhaps, partly because many were not there, but the ones there, perhaps the threshold to participate was higher. And they don't know really who's on the other side of that screen, or am I making a fool of myself, and so forth. And also, this is about introduction and how to sort of create, how do they try to create this kind of connection between the groups. Everyone said their names, but we didn't have any other introduction. This is perhaps because I felt that the time was limited, but it would have had an added value that everyone would have heard, okay, who are you? It felt a bit awkward to have 10 in class presenting themselves and only 2 in another place. So the teacher admits that I'm awkward in this situation of having them to introduce themselves. So why wouldn't the students be awkward in the screen, distance situation, if the teacher is awkward to create connections? So this raises really questions about, we can't really throw out on the teachers, this is your responsibility to just manage, because they don't have the tools to do that. Inequality in interaction. It creates inequality to combine both. It is so easy to help those in class. Sometimes when I said something to them, I suddenly remembered that the distance students didn't hear me. Then I had to go and put my headset on and write on the board to make it visible. The students in class get more spontaneous comments that you think of in the moment when you help someone. That is the biggest difference. And of course, it is easier for face-to-face students to ask questions. It is a bigger step for someone at a distance, partly because they don't really know who's listening to them in class. Is it perhaps 30 students? This is perhaps creating a higher threshold, and you feel that you have a really good question. You have to have a really good question in order to ask something. And one teacher also said that I express a lot of things non-verbally. So when that's what all the students lose, and it's about giving across a message in multiple channels with your body, and that's also a way of understanding the subject, this teacher said. So I think that's a very interesting way of communicating your subject to be as a model for both non-verbally and verbally to understand. A student comes from different schools, and I feel uncomfortable to place demands on students from other schools regarding equipment and attendance, because they have this software. If you don't attend, I put in Vilma, the software, and you're marked. But they're not allowed to do that to students from other schools. So they can't have demands on the distance students, which makes this really weird situation where the teacher cannot demand the same rules for all the students. And the same with equipment as well. So I really feel that the higher level, there's no support here. And it's all on the teacher. And regarding these kind of things, that how to logistically plan, for instance, the schedules at the different schools were clashing. So they limited, instead of having the normal 75 minutes, it was 40 minutes. And then when it's to technology, there are always problems. So a lot of time were spent on technical problems, and then you have a little time, and then you need to create more discussions because it's online, and you have to make them active, and it doesn't work. I mean, I feel like they're running up hills with a big boulder in front of them. That's what it felt like anyway. And these teachers that I have interviewed, they were really highly skilled in a technical sense. Some of them were even responsible for the technology at the school. So that shouldn't have been a problem. So the problems that became thresholds for authentic interaction, as far as I've seen this far, less spontaneity, the orchestration overload of having two groups, shorter lectures due to logistical problems, and they had to put a lot more effort into content planning and editing. They were filming, and which gave less time for the discussion, interaction, and so forth. And lack of proper equipment, that's a big one. No prior norms how to relate, connect between the groups. And this is interesting. The second phase of my research, I will have to do more interviews, do a thorough content analysis of the interviews. It would be interesting to have narratives of, because each case is different, but in the context of Finland, the Swedish-speaking population of Finland, I think it would be very easy to identify the teacher. So it's from an ethical perspective, I don't think it's possible. And interviewing students, I did that in an earlier study, so I get both the teachers and the students' perspective on these. And also interview IT pedagogues, which are many times influencing how these situations are designed. And I've pitched it to an IT pedagogue and also to just a technical person, and they're unaware of these issues. The discussions need to be on all levels. So what I can say, inequality on different levels. The macro level, they make these kind of distance courses so students in smaller school could take all kinds of subjects. But on a micro level, the distance students and the face-to-face students have unequal opportunities to relate, to communicate, to interact. And in that sense, I would say inequality to learn. So I think it's not about, I'm very allergic to the technological determinism, that it's the fault of the technology. But it's more, I think, how can we design it differently? How can we do it differently? Why do we have to throw in an add-on for a teacher to have distance students? Why can't we design the courses differently so it becomes more equal for everybody by using the technology that we have? And Sanna Järvelä, who is a professor at Oulu University here, she and her team, they have given design principle for supporting socially shared regulation of learning in computer collaborative spaces. And I think these are very important because it's a lot of what we've been talking about as well. Because you should put guidance for the awareness of own and others' learning processes. We have to keep the discussion not only on the content and the organizing, but on the learning process around this, and also how the tools affect these kind of learning processes. And the second is support for sharing and interacting, and also externalizing own and others' learning processes. And the third one is to give prompts to both acquire and activate regulatory processes, that I see how I can change my behavior to change the situation outcome. How can I change how I learn in relation to the tools I use? And the teachers, they tried different things, and many, like the one who tried to film the group but didn't work, and another one had tried to have like a chat channel, but it didn't work. And so it's, like I say, it's a lot of trial and terror what they go through. But how can we then scaffold learners in digital relational competence? Can we create easy to follow design patterns for authentic interaction in these kind of environments, in these kind of situations? And I wanted you to sort of become creative a little bit. Think of a situation when you felt relationally competent. in a distance learning situation, or when you have used technology. So just take a minute and think, when did I feel really relationally competent? Do you know a situation? Next one. Can you break it down to a process that can be taught? Can you break this kind of relational experience into like a design pattern which could be taught in, for instance, a distance course? I think this is very intriguing, because could we give small kind of instructions on how to frame a situation, so every time you open it, you do a certain thing, or something like it. That was it. So